Hello, I'm Jared Uraine, and this is The Spectrum. This is where we walk through today's most important news with facts first, human meaning, and why it actually matters for your life. And it would help if I had a microphone today, I guess. So here's what we're going to do is get this started. And I should see that fire right up. Awesome. So today we're taking a look at the showdown in the Strait of Hormuz and what it means for war risks and prices, how much the Iran war has already cost the United States, what's happening to gas inflation and housing in May, and finally, how the political climate at home shapes the choices that are being made. Let's check it out. Hello, my name is Jared Uraine, and this is The Spectrum, where we take a look at facts first in the news, without any spin, without any hype. And the goal here is really to just communicate the human impact as well as how it's translating into costs at home. Now, I am the broker owner of the 5 Diamond Group over at Vice Realty, and my goal is to help every one of our friends and fellow human beings understand how the shift has happened and find ways to get new sources of information. And that is what the Spectrum is all about. So let's get started. The Strait of Hormuz. Why a narrow stretch of water halfway around the world matters to families. Iran has spent weeks using mines, drones, missiles, and fast attack boats to choke off shipping traffic, especially through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow waterway that normally carries a big share of the world's oil. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has claimed authority to forbid passage through the strait and has attacked or has boarded merchant ships, warning that foreign warships that are entering in the area could be hit. Now, in response, the United States has launched a mission called Project Freedom. Now, this is where they're sending warships, aircraft, helicopters, and drones to guide and defend merchant vessels through the strait. The U.S. officials say Iranian forces recently launched missiles, drones, and attacks from small boats and at American and commercial ships. Now, the U.S. forces have destroyed some of those attacking craft, yet they deny reports that a U.S. warship was hit. At least 2 commercial vessels and a UAE port have been attacked or have been damaged in recent days. And at times, the strait has looked nearly deserted as ships wait for conditions to become clear. Some officials still talk about a ceasefire, but both Washington and Tehran now describe the situation as extremely fragile. So much for 2 weeks. Here's the human meaning. The concern here is that millions of people's basic stability, their food costs, their fuel prices, and even their sense of security are being hostage by a small number of strategic decisions in a very narrow waterway with very little input from people who will feel the consequences. Coastal workers, sailors, and families living paycheck to paycheck are the ones who are going to feel the shock first, not just the people debating strategy in the security rooms. When leaders treat energy choke points as leverage instead of lifelines, they risk normalizing the idea that ordinary lives are acceptable collateral. Now, communities that barely appear in coverage, port cities, fishing towns, low-income neighborhoods, these are the hardest hit by price spikes. They end up paying for the decisions that they did not make. Why does this matter now? Well, if shipping remains disruptive, we can expect continued pressure on fuel and transportation costs worldwide, not just locally. That does trickle down into our gas, into our grocery, and really anything that moves in our life today. The longer both sides frame this as a test of resolve instead of a shared logistics problem, this is going to be a harder hit for everyone. It will be even harder for leaders to back down without losing face, even when de-escalation could clearly serve the public. For households far from the Gulf, the impact may show up as mysterious price increases months from now. Connecting those to shipping lanes and war decisions is part of understanding what's really happening. There are some outlets that treat this mainly as a dramatic countdown to war or as a personality clash between politicians. The more important question here is who is being protected and who is being put at risk by each side's choices about the strait. Over the next week, watch concrete indicators, things like ship traffic volumes, insurance rates, and credible reports that mines are being cleared, not just speeches. Those are the signs that will matter most for your bills and for broader stability. War costs and Project Freedom. Alongside the standoff at the sea, we're learning more about the cost of the war itself. A Pentagon official told Congress that the war with Iran has already cost the United States around $25 billion in just a few months. Most of that money has gone to weapons, operations, and replacing equipment. The administration is signaling it may soon ask Congress for a much larger supplemental package, potentially up to $200 billion, to sustain operations and replenish stockpiles. At the same time, Project Freedom, the operation to escort merchant ships through the strait, has begun, which adds new ongoing costs and risks on top of the earlier war spending. Here's the human meaning. The concern here is that the people at least able to absorb the costs or even these service cuts are often the ones who lose when war spending grows and domestic priorities get pushed to the side. In many neighborhoods, war shows up not as explosions on TVs, but as delayed road repairs, understaffed schools, and higher borrowing costs. When debates focus on who is strong or weak instead of who's accountable for trade-offs, ordinary taxpayers become a silent funding source, and communities already bearing the brunt of housing and healthcare costs may see yet another reason their local problems are labeled too expensive to fix. Why this matters now. The decisions Congress makes about war funding will shape what is realistically available for housing disaster recovery, schools, and healthcare over the next several years. If war spending is treated as unpatriotic, it becomes harder for citizens to have an honest conversation about what they are being asked to trade away. On the personal level, the same macro forces that drive war budgets influence interest rates and investor behavior, which shows up in your mortgage rate, your job market, and your retirement savings. Watching whether members of both parties press for clear goals, exit criteria, and cost limits can tell you more about who's serious about stewardship than any speech about fiscal responsibility. And when you see headlines about record defense budgets, it's worth asking which threats those budgets are meant to address, and which everyday threats to housing, health, and climate resilience are being underfunded in the process. Gas, inflation, and the cost of living. Let's bring it back home. Let's bring it back to what you feel every week. In the wake of the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, the average U.S. gas prices have climbed to somewhere in the mid $4 range per gallon. This is up sharply since the war began. According to national headline summaries, this is what you can expect across the country. Now, at the same time, a recent inflation report showed overall inflation at its lowest level in nearly 25 years, thanks partly to earlier drops in gas and moderating rent increases. But even with that improvement, the price of basics like fuel, food, and shelter remains higher than it was a few years ago. Now, here's the human meaning. The concern here is that when leaders talk about beating inflation, while many people are paying significantly more for basic necessities, it can deepen the sense that official narratives and lived reality are drifting apart. Households that have already cut back on extras now face tough choices about commuting, childcare, and debt, just to keep cars fueled and homes heated or cooled. When coverage treats price spikes as partisan talking points instead of a daily stressor, it can trivialize the anxiety of people counting every mile and every meal. Communities with fewer transit options and weaker safety nets are again the ones that are asked to absorb the sharpest shocks. Why does this matter now? If fuel remains expensive, it acts as a hidden tax on time and mobility, especially for workers who cannot work from home. The gap between official good news and personal experience can fuel distrust and make people more vulnerable to simplistic or even conspiratorial explanations of what's happening. The way policymakers respond, whether they focus on supporting those affected or simply manage averages, these will reveal whose stability is considered non-negotiable. And when you hear discussions about interest rates, remember, they're not abstract. They're one of the main tools used to respond to exactly this kind of conflict-driven price pressure, and they feed directly into housing and job markets. The May 2026 housing picture. Finally, a quick look at housing. Early May forecasts suggest a sluggish but not collapsing U.S. housing market nationwide. Inventory is rising toward more normal levels, bidding wars are less frequent, and national price growth is modest. Existing home sales are projected to be slightly higher than in March, but still below long-term norms, with the national median price only modestly above last year. Mortgage rates are expected to average a bit above 6% for 2026, keeping many potential buyers cautious as more listings appear. How does this affect us as humans? Well, the concern here is that while charts may show a healthier, more balanced market, many families still feel locked out of home ownership or trapped in rentals because wages and savings haven't caught up to the new price and rate reality. For some households, the decision is no longer just buy or rent, but stay put and delay life plans, because any move risks higher cost and less security. And when housing is covered mainly as an investment story, well, it can obscure that it's first a stability story about where people sleep and build their lives. Why this matters now? Well, the housing phase may be about to take some careful timing changes. And let me try that again. Right now, the housing phase may be about careful timing and right sizing expectations, not expecting a crash or a sudden return to an ultra cheap money. The choices builders, landlords, and local governments make now about zoning, supply, and protections set the stage for how resilient housing is in the next downturn. For you, the best way to cut through the noise is to track a few local metrics. Recognize how much inventory is in your price range. Identify how long these homes are staying on the market, and then track rental trends. These tell you more about real options than the national headlines alone. And in this transition period, clear, honest information from agents, lenders, and journalists can be the difference between a decision that stabilizes your life and one that quietly adds strain. That's where the mission of this Spectrum and the Five Diamond Group line up. We are here to provide you with the right information the first time. And when we do that, we have a phenomenal experience with all of our clients. That is why we've been able to rank a solid 5-star ranking from all of our clients on Google reviews and be considered the #1 real estate office in downtown Las Vegas. For more information, you can reach out to me directly, or you can drop any name in the comments below. Subscribe for alerts, as we will be posting reports like these daily. And if you want to join me at 6 a.m., you can chat with me alongside these comments. Thank you for joining me. That's today's Spectrum, and our goal is simple. Share what has happened, separate what's confirmed from what is still unclear, and make the human impact and future stakes visible. All of this without partisan jerseys or outrage performance. As you see other coverage in the news today, notice who explains the consequences for your life, or who's mostly keeping score for one side or the other. The more that we demand clarity, honesty, and basic respect from the sources of our information, the harder it will become to sell us spin. I'm Jared Uraine with the Five Diamond Group at Vice Realty, and this is the Spectrum. Be kind to each other, ask for evidence, and I'll see you next time.